So I get this question a lot when it comes to GNS3, and you know, I always recommend GNS3 to people, and people will say, yeah, but you can't run a switch in GNS3. You know, I get this all the time, especially, you know, with some guys that are just starting out with GNS3 or just starting out in their network studies, and they want to use GNS3, but they just don't know how to do LAN switching. They don't know how to do layer 2. And everybody has this belief that GNS3 doesn't do layer 2. Could not be further from the truth. GNS3 absolutely does layer 2. There's probably a handful of features that GNS3 doesn't do well in layer 2, at least in the current version. And you know, by the time you watch this video, that may be true. Things like UDLD, GNS3 doesn't do well in layer 2. Things like private VLANs, GNS3 doesn't do well in layer 2. And there's one or two other things that in layer 2 just doesn't work. So yeah, you may need to go out and buy yourself a cheap managed switch, or you know, see if your company, your enterprise, or you know, if you can acquire some type of switch that supports these. I mean, it could be anything. It could be a 3560, 3750. I mean, heck, it could be even a 2960 for some of this stuff. So for the most part, though, GNS3 absolutely does layer 2, and it does it in a few different ways. And I'm going to show you how essentially you can do any type of layer 2 in GNS3. So I've just opened it up. You can see that I have my screen here to either save my project and whatnot. I'm going to cancel it because I'm not going to save anything. Now, before I open up my switches, here's the disclaimer. I work for an organization that allows me to use some very specific Cisco images that are not available to you folks out there in the world. So if you're working for an enterprise and, you know, just some privately owned enterprise organization, you probably will not have access to some of the images that I have. I mention that because I don't want anybody to ask. I can't deal with, you know, the comment sections. I can't really reply if you ask me, hey, where do I get that image? I work for an organization that allows me to use them. So just be aware of that when I expand these, okay? So when you expand your switch button in GNS3, you'll have a number of different options here. You can have a frame relay switch. Your frame relay switch would be just that. It's a kind of a bare bones, dumbed down frame relay switch that's built into GNS3 that allows you to actually set up your DLCs with a point and click. So if you bring this in here, you click in. I'm actually going to select my server, not my local host, but you can select your local host if you have it set up that way. You would right click on it, say configure, and here is essentially where you would set up your DLCs, right? So you would say, okay, you know, port 1 is going to go to DLC 101, port 12 is going to go to whatever, and you would just build those DLCs. So you would say add, and then you would add another one and add another one. I mean, you could add, you know, a bazillion of these if you wanted to, and this will actually take the place of your frame relay switch if you don't necessarily want to build one on your own using a router, right? So let me cancel this and we'll get this guy out of here. The other option that you have for layer 2 switching is the built-in GNS3 layer 2 switch. And again, I'm going to choose my server. So I have a remote ESXi server. I have everything set up to run in ESXi in GNS3. So I'm going to select that host here and we'll say okay. And what I would basically do here, so let me just move this name down here. So I have a layer 2 switch, right? Let me go to my routers here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag 2 routers in here, and let's connect them and see if we can get connectivity going across this switch. So I'll go ahead here. We'll select gig 00. We'll put this guy on port 1. We'll select gig 00. We'll put this guy on port 2, right? And what I can do is I can right click here and I can say configure, and here I can set essentially what I want to do. So you can see here that I can either set this to a .1Q port or I can set it to an access port. So for example, we'll move this over to the side. This way maybe we can see both the topology. So suppose I was going to run sub interfaces on this router. So maybe I was going to actually start tagging frames with .1Q and some sub interfaces here on router 1. I could go to port 1 and I could set this to a .1Q rather than an access port. Okay, or I could set this to, you know, you'll have to pick the port here. So I would say port 1, whatever VLAN I want that to be a member of. So let's say that I want to change port 1 to VLAN 10. I would go ahead and do that, and you can see here how VLAN 10 is now changed for port 1. So we connected router 2 to port 2, right? So I need to change that as well. So here what I can do is I can double click on this port, or I can go ahead in the port and I can just type it in and say port 2 if I want to. For the VLAN, I can use the up arrow, or I can just enter it in. And again, I can change it to whatever I want, either .1Q or access port. Once I say add, it overwrites whatever that original access port was. So you can set up your VLANs that way, and I can go in, you see right here that it's an 8-port switch essentially. But it doesn't have to be. I could go ahead and I could say, you know, port 9, port 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I could keep going here and I could add, you know, a 24 port switch if I wanted to. So now I have a 24 port switch. They're all VLAN 10, but you get the idea. So you can mess around with this switch and it's all point and click. And you can change these to access ports. So example, maybe port 9, I want it to be that .1Q port. So I can say .1Q and boom, it changes to .1Q. So I'm going to say okay here just for kicks. So let's go ahead and start up this topology. And we'll have router 1 and router 2. Let's go ahead and console into these guys. So in theory, we should have our secure CRT pop open. And let's see if we can just get basic reachability between these guys. So come on, little fella. Just get the little Dory, you know. Come on, little fella. Anyway, so config T, interface. I think we did gig 0, right? Do you show IP interface brief? Yeah, so I'll say interface gig 00, and I'll say no shut, IP address 10.1.1.1. We'll give this guy a /24 because who cares? We'll go over to router 2, do the same thing, config T, interface gig 00, no shut, IP address 10.1.1.2, right? We don't want to have an IP conflict, although we could, who cares, right? We'll wait for that to essentially come up. We'll say do ping 10.1.1.1. And let's see if we can get reachability through our switch. And there we go. So this is one way that you can do layer 2 switching in GNS3. If you're not looking to have a managed switch and you're just looking to do more routing, right? Because maybe you're studying more layer 3. Maybe you're studying your routing protocols. Maybe you're studying those different concepts. You can go ahead and just use a simple unmanaged switch that's point and click. But let's face it, that's not what everybody wants. So let's go ahead and let's turn off our topology here. We'll go ahead and delete our unmanaged switch. And let's go back into our switching section. Now, again, a number of images I have in here I'm allowed to use because of the organization I work for. And so you may not be able to have those. But this one here, you should be able to get if you have access to the viral appliances or you have the ability to load these appliances that GNS3 gives you. If you don't know how to do that, I have a video on my YouTube channel that will actually show you how to import those appliances right from Viral. So the layer 2 iOS V switch that comes with Viral, you can absolutely load into GNS3. I find GNS3 a little bit easier to use, to be honest with you. It could just be because I've used it, you know, for I don't know, since day one. So here, what I'm going to do is I want to have a managed switch because maybe I want to light up some VLANs, I want to light up some SVIs, maybe I want to have switch 1 actually, you know, take place in layer 3 routing. I mean, who knows? So I'm going to go ahead and click my link button. I'll click my router 1. We'll say gig 00, and I'll set this to gig 00. We'll set this guy gig 10, and maybe we'll put this guy on gig 01. Or maybe we'll say gig 10, so we'll have them both on the same side. Just so we don't forget, we'll go ahead and click the button there to label the interfaces. So we'll leave those there like that, and we'll go ahead and turn this guy on. Once we turn it on, our links turn green, and we'll go ahead and hit the console button so that we get our secure CRT pop up. Let's delete our old options here. Our switch should be booting in theory. There we go, iOS V. We'll go ahead and hit enter. So in the meantime here, what we're going to do is let's go ahead and let's actually get the IP addresses configured on our router while the switch actually boots up. So we'll say config T, interface gig 00, no shut, IP address 10.1.1.1. We'll say 255.255.255.0. Do show IP interface brief E assigned. And so we have an IP address, up, good deal. And I think this guy was 10, right? That's what we used. Config T, interface gig 10, no shut. And we will say IP address 10.1.1.2, and we'll do /24. Do show IP interface brief E assigned. Okay, cool deal. Let's check our switch. Let's see how Mr. Switch is doing here. Looks like he's still booting up. Sometimes, you know, the iOS V does take a while. It doesn't boot up, you know, instantly. So, you know, it also depends on how many devices you have running, how many things you have going on. You know, if I had 47 routers here, the switch may take a little bit longer. So what I'll do here is I'll pause the video, and I'm just going to wait for this guy to essentially finish booting up and give me a command prompt. All right, so the switch is finished booting up, and you can see by the screen here that I got some error message here for a duplex mismatch. There are some ways around that. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off CDP. So I'm going to say config T, no CDP run. And this way we won't get that message. I'm not really interested in showing you guys all the different ways that we might be able to get around this. Sometimes it depends on the image, depends on, you know, the interfaces you're connecting to. Sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you won't. I've found that in GNS3, sometimes the layer 2 is really hit or miss. So I just turn it off. I'm not really concerned with CDP in detail, only because I can see what interfaces run here. For those of you guys that might be studying CDP, again, there are some ways around this. You could turn off CDP version 1, you could turn on CDP version 2, and you can also Google some of the images that you're using, and sometimes you'll find that there are ways to fix it. You could try hard coding your duplex, but this is kind of a common thing. I usually just turn CDP off on my my layer 2 switch. So we'll go ahead and we'll give this guy a host name. We'll say switch 1, because why not? Now, right now, if I say do show VLAN brief, again, this is a layer 2 switch, right? I'm running the iOS V image that came with Viral. I'm running it inside of GNS3. And so what do I want to do here? Well, maybe I want to do VLAN 10, just like I did with router 1 and router 2. So I can say VLAN 10. Let's go ahead and give it a name. We'll say layer 2, because why not? We'll say exit, do show VLAN brief. And what I want to do is I want to set the individual ports to be in that VLAN. So I think we used gig 00 and gig 0 or gig 10, right? So we need to put those guys. So here we have gig 00 and gig 10. So what we'll do is we need to put those guys into that VLAN. So we'll say interface range gig 00, comma gig 10. And we'll say switch port mode access, switch port access VLAN 10. Do show run interface gig 00. And there we have it. So we've automatically now placed both of these interfaces into VLAN 10, and we've set them to access ports. Okay, so let's go back over to switch 1 and let's see if we can ping. You can see that I get the duplex mismatches here as well until I turned off CDP on the switch. And again, it's kind of a common problem. I expect that I usually do that. But again, I have, you know, back in the day when I was studying CDP, you kind of work around it. For those of you guys that are struggling with budget, I mean, you can either go spend a couple $100s on a switch, or you can just deal with the fact that sometimes CDP might not work, right? But again, there's a number of different workarounds, and you can find those out there on the internets. So let's say do ping 10.1.1.2. Since we're on router 1, we'll ping router 2, and let's see if we can ping through our switch. And there we have it. So 80%. Now we have our 100%. We should be able to, in theory, if we really wanted to. Let's see if we can light up an SVI. So we'll say exit interface VLAN 10 IP address 10.1.1.3 255.255.255.0. No shut, just for kicks. Do show IP interface brief E assigned, and we have our layer 3 switched virtual interface SVI on our switch, and we should be able to ping it from router 1. So let's actually up arrow, and we'll say ping.3, and let's see if the switch actually responds. And there we go. So you can absolutely run switches in GNS3. Again, most of the time I will use the viral image of iOS V in there, and it works pretty well. Sometimes I'll use other images that I'm permitted to use. But again, you can absolutely run layer 2 switches in GNS3, and that's how you do it. So basically, you'll either drag the unmanaged switch in GNS3 that comes with it, or you can load that iOS V viral layer 2 image, which if you have access to viral, you should be able to get. You can pop it in GNS3 and boom, there you go.